Today I'm back on the 4500. I'm going to be putting the glow plugs in now. I'm going to make sure I put never sees on each and every one of these glow plugs so the next guy doesn't have troubles like I did. We also had a problem with one of the exhaust manifold bolt holes in the head. When I took this in, if you remember from one of the previous videos, I showed we had one of the passenger side that had no threads at all. Well, I told the machine shop, I need you to helicoil that and check all the others because it's aluminum head. If it needs any others, just go ahead and do it. Well, they missed one, and I didn't double check their work, so then I missed it. And I already put the head on, and there was one on this side, the driver's side. And of course, in one of the most inopportune locations that only had about 2 threads that the bolt would catch on. So I felt I had no choice but to drill it out and helicoil it so we can get back to the right size bolt. I couldn't use a larger size bolt. Really didn't want to. I preferred to do the helicoil because once you go to a bigger size bolt, it's over. You can't go back. So I chose to go the helicoil method, that route. I got it in there, and we've overcome that little battle. But you know, the war is still on. This is a very, very frustrating motor to me. I stand firm on my opinion of this motor, as I've expressed to many, many people over the years. This is not my favorite, and if I never have to do this again, I'll be just fine with that. A lot of guys like these motors. I'm not a fan. I'll stick to the other stuff that I like and know better. But let's get moving. We got to get the rocker box cleaned up. We fought these getting them out. This is where the injector goes. What we're going to do is give them a little bit of PB Blaster because there's corrosion in there. And this is a wheel cylinder hone. Stick it in there. This way we're getting a nice even I don't know what you call
surface.
it. Yeah. So the stones are flat. So when you put them in here, this thing's spring loaded right here, so it automatically keeps pressure on the stones. So as long as you're straight, all right, now look inside there. That's why we fought them other ones that were corroded in here. I think they were corroded elsewhere. See, you can see in this one, look at how corroded that is. See it in there, that big line of crap?
Looks better.
I'm just taking the corrosion. Yeah, see, there's still some up here on the top. That's what that looks like. Yeah, that one's really bad.
Can't find it in the camera. Oh, wrong one. Yeah.
Boy, this one's got a lot of corrosion in it. This one's going to take a few times. But at least we're doing that stone is cleaning up evenly, so we're not going to get a cut in the O-ring. We'll put it in there. You can adjust how much tension is on these, which I don't know if you can see that or not. I about wore out these stones. Use these on air brakes on the pivot holes, you know, for the rollers. Let me take a look at that now. I guess I just moved it up with crud.
Yeah, it's a lot better.
Not too bad, huh? All right, I'm gonna finish this up, and then we're gonna put it together. It's not gonna work. This bend isn't right. It's hitting right here. And this isn't right. It's hitting right here. Alright, so I'm getting ready to put on the lower rocker box gasket. Now, I believe they probably intend for you to reuse those steel shims that were underneath it. However, if you remember from the previous video, the passenger side rocker box cover was stuck in place because two of the injector bolts were corroded so badly down in the hole where they go through that rocker box that they broke off. So it broke into pieces, so I had to order another one. I figured I'm not going to just replace one rocker box gasket. I'll do both of them. We ordered a set up. I believe you probably could have reused those if they weren't damaged, but it is what it is. I'm putting this together, and you know, I'm not a fan of the choice of fasteners here. I don't know why someone would choose to use a Allen socket head fastener in a situation like this where it's laying at this angle. It's just going to fill up with water and rust and crud and dirt, and you know, they're difficult. It's hard to get a Allen wrench down in there, Allen socket. So we took screwdriver, little small screwdriver, and tried to clean them all out to get in there as best as we could. I think there was a far better choice than this, that's for sure. You'll see here on this side that, you know, I took the lower rocker box cover off when I disassembled. I took the upper off, then the lower. I thought you had to remove the upper to get to bolts for the lower, but that wasn't the case. Apparently, the upper is just removable overhead without having to take the lower cover off too. So that was my inexperience there. But on the other side, we'll put it together as one piece since it's not required. The other side is apparently off a pickup truck, so they are the same, just some of the mounting holes that are cast into that upper rocker cover. Some are used, some are not. The things that aren't used, I have to clean up and tap out, and you know, change things around so it suits our needs. But it's definitely usable. It's not a problem. But this side's just about finished. You guys saw earlier how we cleaned up the holes for the injectors. You'll see here that as soon as I get done with this, I take that red fender cover, whatever it's called, and I cover those back up because the injector holes are still open. And I don't want to take a chance of a nut or a bolt or something falling down in there, and I got to take all this back apart. I ordered a new pipe, and it was bent wrong, and it hit on everything. So I just cleaned up the old one. I'm gonna put it right back on. Crazy.
Crazy Daisy.
So I cleaned up this rocker box cover the same way using that brake wheel cylinder hone. Works very well. I mean, you got to use a little common sense. Once you see the corrosion is gone, you know, the white dust stops blowing out of there, then you need to stop because you will get into the material. However, those stones on that thing are pretty light. They're not very aggressive at all, and it did a very nice job. They cleaned up real well. You got to get that corrosion out of there, because if you don't, you go to shove your injector in there. You don't want that corrosion to get down there between the copper washer and the injector cup, because it won't seal. It'll give you a false torque for one, and for two, as the engine runs, it's going to blow that corrosion out of there and fill that chamber up with soot, and then you'd be hard pressed to get it out of there. Very, very difficult once soot gets around that injector. So I want to make sure it's clean. I want it to go in good. I don't want my O-ring to get damaged as I slide it in either. I couldn't see these markings on these little bitty tabs, so I had to grab my wife's pretty glasses, and it really looked pretty on me, I'm sure. So what I'm doing is tapping out that hole. That's where the glow plug harness bolts, the retaining bracket bolts into that rocker cover. And the front one was corroded up. It had been used, but it was corroded. The second one back has a plastic push pin in there. Probably the pickup truck must use a push pin back here. So the plastic push pin was broke off. I was trying really hard with a pick and a pair of needle nose pliers, trying to work it out of there so I wouldn't have to get a drill bit. I was worried about boogering up the threads. You know, I don't want to damage this. I mean, I have another one I could use, but you know, I'd rather not. I should have done this before I put it on the truck. I just didn't even consider it. Didn't even think they'd be broke off. So the pick's not working out. So I go grab a drill bit, and it's a much smaller drill bit than the actual hole, so that as soon as I started drilling it, grabbed a hold of that plastic, and it was really easy to get out. So once I got it out, I went ahead and tapped the hole, did the same thing for the back one, and then I'm going to lay that fender cover down over top of the injector holes and shove it down in there, and I'm going to blow them holes out, make sure they're good and clean. And then I'll make sure the bolts all go in with no troubles, so that if anybody ever has to do this again, you know, they don't have the troubles that we did. That's kind of where we're going with this. I know it's a lot of tedious, time-consuming work here, but it makes a huge difference. I mean, you won't believe the amount of time I've spent running taps into holes that were troublesome coming out. You know, I don't know if I left many taps in my set the whole time I was using this. Putting this back together, it's been out the whole time. The hardest ones are exhaust, because that exhaust is always so rusty, and I always tap the holes and then take a die on studs and clean them up. It's well worth it. It makes the installation so much better. I get a good torque on everything. You know, again, time consuming, very, very time consuming. We're just about done here, and we can start moving on. I actually end up cleaning up the injectors, but I don't get that on video, so you guys kind of miss it. Alright, I'm getting ready to put the intake manifold in place. I need to put a couple studs in here. The purpose for these studs is the fact that I'm going to, before I put this intake manifold on, it gets a bead of RTV all the way around it, and that is all that seals the intake to the head. So the two studs that I'm going to put in, one on the left-hand side, one on the right-hand side, will hold the manifold in place so it's not sliding around while I'm putting the rest of the bolts in. I'm not sure where those are supposed to be, because you know, the last guy to be in here, who knows, but I assume that's where it's going to be, where it should be. It didn't cause me any troubles later, so I guess it worked out all right. I'm not a fan of the RTV for the actual seal, but that's how they built it. That's how we're going to put it back together. This is one place where I'll definitely use a torque wrench on here because there's not a lot of room for error. You have aluminum against aluminum with just RTV. There's really no cushion here. So this is one place I'm going to be very careful with a torque wrench for sure. It's a 3-piece intake manifold set. You see, I just pulled my blue towels out of the other head. I got it cleaned up. Now I'm setting that down in there. I've already put the Beta silicone on here. I did the same thing with the studs. And again, we will be very careful with the torque wrench. I don't know why this is 3-piece. There must be some reason that it needs to be 3 pieces, but you can't just remove it as one unit because the center section has to be removed because there's a bolt underneath there going into each head. So I don't know. Certainly, I would think there's got to be a better way to do this, but again, that's how it's built. That's how we're going to do it. We're going to put it back together the way it's supposed to be, and we're getting close to being done with these 2 pieces. But the center section, um, it's a little bit different. Like the 2 bottom holes are slotted. There's 2 bottom holes. There's 4 bolts going into each side manifold. So what I ended up doing was I put it down in there, and you start tightening the ones at the bottom that are slotted, and it seems like then it brings that center section down to where the upper holes will line up. I tried to do it the other way. It didn't work. So I found out that, I just pushed down on it. I tapped down with that dead blow hammer just a little bit just to get it down in there. Then it goes in just fine. Next, we're going to work on what we call the air horn. It's a piece of the intake that goes into that crossover. One of the intercooler pipes would hook to it, and the air charge pipes, that is. It goes in real easy. It's just got a O-ring seal on it. Put a little lube on it, slides right in, and it doesn't get bolted down until we put some more brackets on. I'm going to stick this turbo up in here. I've cleaned up the surface where the oil return line goes in, and apparently they want you to reuse those seals for the banjo fitting for the oil supply. I would like to replace them, but it is what it is. And then I'm going to clean up the face of the turbo where the gaskets go, so I can get the up pipes going, and we will put them in. And before that, I need to get the EGR cooler down from the shelf and clean out the bolt holes. I'm going to tap the holes again. I've been cleaning out holes, like I said earlier, on almost everything I'm putting together because I don't want any troubles, and a lot of this stuff came apart really hard. I had to heat it up, and I don't want to gall the threads going back in or destroy it, so we're going to take a little extra time and tap the bolt holes. This is the first time I've ever watched a video while I was working in the shop. Of course, I got quite a few hours in this motor, and I'm over the critical stuff. I mean, now it's just nuts and bolts. I'm not. There's not too much here that's gonna be, over the top where it's gonna have to have a huge attention to detail. I went and go get my tap now. I'm gonna tap out these bolt holes in the turbo housing. I got a socket for the end of the tap so I can use my battery ratchet to run it in and run it out. Sure saves a lot of time. I'd take every one of these bolts out with a torch to heat them up, and I don't want them having trouble going in, so I'll tap them out. And I have spent hours and hours cleaning holes and finding bolts. I mean, you just can't imagine how many bolts we're missing. And again, I do not like when you have 3 or 4 bolts holding something together, and then you have 2 or 3 different types of bolts with different head types, and one's got a built-in washer and the other one's just got a loose washer and all. So it took me a while to find what I was looking for to make it the way it probably should have been. The dealers around here have been closed down, the parts department, so I can't even get these factory bolts if I wanted them, and it's just not available. So I do the best I can. Alright, so I had to mute the sound from the video because I have a friend of mine on speakerphone right now. And I'm pretty sure he's not going to want our personal conversation spread across YouTube here. So while I'm talking to him, I'm just going to continue to work. I'm putting the up pipes in, and here in a minute, there's a bracket that goes down here in the lower part. Man, I have to flip that thing around left and right and try and figure out how it goes on, because I've worked on 6 or 7 trucks since I tore this apart, and I'm not as sharp as I once was, so some of these things I forget. It all goes together pretty cool, pretty easy, no troubles. I ran a die down the threads of these exhaust studs also, and took them on the wire wheel, cleaned them up. I'm spending an awful lot of time cleaning stuff up to make it easier on myself, and I'm going to tell you, I think it's well worth the time, because I didn't have any troubles with these bolts going in. I didn't have any troubles with stripping bolts. Well, I did have a problem with a couple things, but that was damage that was already done. We'll find that later. But the camera shuts off here because the battery goes dead, and I'm over on this side, and I look down, and that's right where the oil filter is. So as soon as I tighten this up, I end up changing out the oil filter, so she gets a fresh oil filter. And we're going to change oil, of course, because anytime you take the heads off, there's very likely that you get coolant in the oil. Plus, it's just good practice. You don't know what could have gotten in the oil when you took it apart. So we'll change oil. She'll get 1540 Rotella. I got the up pipe going in. I cleaned up the up pipe because it actually slides inside the turbo a little bit. And then there's a V-band clamp also. I cleaned up the up pipe on both ends, but I didn't want to clean inside the turbo because I didn't want to put a bunch of rust in there that would have to go through the turbo itself. So I'm putting this bottom V-band clamp on, and it's tight. It's not going together real well. And I cleaned this up good. So I'm tapping it all the way around so that it will seat instead of trying to use the bolt itself, the T-bolt, to tighten it up. And I don't get very far, and it snaps. The place that it snapped was already broken, apparently. And when I looked at it, it was broke 2/3 of the way across there. And I just finished off with 1/3. So yet just something else I just need to order. So I called Napa, and I measured that one out, and they just ordered me another one. It'll be here in a day or two or whatever. And meanwhile, I'm just going to continue. So you guys aren't going to see this, but I've prepped all the injectors. I've cleaned up the bodies because they're a steel injector body, and it slides in that aluminum, and they were very rusty. So I took them on the wire wheel, cleaned them up real good, made sure the groove is clean where the O-rings go, took off the old copper washer, and put a new one on. And that's the way these should go in. You should be able to slide them in there, put your heel on it, and just push, and it should snap into place. These are the injector hold down bolts. You see I'm slathering off with never sees because they go in that rocker box cover, and that's probably around between 1.5 inches and 2 inches thick, where the steel bolt goes through aluminum. And I don't want anybody to have the same problem I did, with them seizing up in there. Before I put the injectors in, I looked down the injector cups just to be sure there's not a copper washer stuck down in there, which there wasn't. A lot of guys will say they'll look at their old injector and pull that one off, but you never know if some guy put an injector in it and didn't know that he had left an copper washer down in there, or someone before him did, and you could be stacking them, and that'd be a really bad day. I can only torque down 6 of these bolts because broke 2 of them when we was taking it apart, and I ordered a full set of 8 because that's the only way. That was the cheapest way to get them, that's for sure. Price per bolt, and they're coming out of Florida, and they're not here yet, so I have to wait for the other 2 to get here before I can torque them down. So I can do that after I can get to them, so it's not a problem. I'm gonna move on to this fuel rail. So this is a common rail system. It's a high pressure fuel pump down the valley. It's engine driven. It creates high pressure fuel and sends it out to a common rail. That's how it gets its name. You see there's a manifold on the left, a manifold on the right, which a manifold is nothing more than one supply coming in and several deliveries coming off. So you got one supply coming in, and you have 8 total injector lines, 4 on each side, and they go to the top of the injector. That's what feeds the injector with the high pressure fuel. This particular system uses a return line that's in the top of the injector, which presents its own problems. It's a steel injector body with a plastic return line that pushes into. It's an O-ring fitting that pushes into the injector, and it's held in by a clip. And again, it's steel, and this is the Northeast, so steel rusts. And I struggled getting these apart, and some of the return lines broke off in the injectors, little plastic pieces. So I have to get those out too. That was a load of fun too. It wasn't difficult, it was just worrisome because you don't want to screw up the inside of the injector and have to replace it. These bolts are in about a most inopportune place. A smarter thing to have done would have been to put um, the fuel rails in place first and then put the turbo in. But again, this is my lack of experience with these engines. Had I put the fuel rail in there first, a lot of things, like there's 4 bolts that hold the manifolds to the heads. It'd have been much easier for me to get into those. I have to use a ratcheting wrench instead. It's not impossible, obviously, but just not quite as easy. The fuel line. Let's see. The return lines are separate from the pressure lines. Like, they're not held together. And then there's also the supply fuel to the CP3. So you basically have 3 sets of fuel lines to mess with, plus the actual lines coming from the tank. It's really just an odd setup to me. It's kind of complicated for what it is. I mean, there's fuel lines running all over the place. I think there's a far simpler way to do this that, you wouldn't have so much in the way. But it is what it is. So I cracked the lines on the manifold so I could start them on each injector, because I want them loose at each end so they can seat where they need to be. So I'll loosen both ends, and then I'll snug them down where they need to be, and I'll snug all of them, and then we'll tighten them up. So now I'm getting ready to put the return lines on the injectors, and I'm looking at them, and I'm realizing that the little pieces of plastic are all broke. Well, not all of them, but there's quite a few of them that are broke. They're an O-ring fitting on an O-ring connection on a plastic fitting, and it pushes in the top of the injector, and it's held in by a clip. And apparently these are problematic, because I looked online to get some, and they make you can get several different styles. You can get the same thing as what's in there. You can get just the ends and just replace the ones that are broken, or you can get an aluminum replacement one. I opted for the aluminum. Now, that being said, you've got aluminum going into steel, so we're going to have to make sure, even though it's an O-ring seal, we'll put never seize on it. But I'm looking at this, I'm trying to decide which way we're going to go, and now I have to get the pieces, the broken plastic pieces, out of the top of the injectors, and it's a little worrisome, but it really wasn't that big a deal. I ended up taking a very tiny drill bit, and I put it in there by hand and twist it with 2 fingers until it would bite on the plastic, and then I was able to take vice grips on the drill bit and break it loose, and it worked out okay. So this is another standstill and something to stop me. So I'm basically going to have to stop here on that, and I'm just going to keep moving forward because we got plenty to do. I can still get to these return lines, and once they come in, we'll go ahead and put them in. But we're going to move on to something else here. We're going to set the fuel lines up in place. This is the supply and return to the tank. They got quick disconnect fittings or push to connect fittings up at the engine, and then there's some holders down the transmission. I'm putting them in down there. They weren't in there to begin with, so that's never good, because these are metal lines, and when they can move around, that's when they end up with they can crack, or get chafed and rubbed through and all that kind of stuff. I'm hooking up the CP3 right there. There's a steel line that goes into the CP3 course because it's high pressure. So I'm getting that hooked up and getting ready to do the passenger side injector lines too. This CP3, I was amazed. I'm looking at this, and the fuel lines on this thing, it's got regular fuel hose with hose clamps. I mean, it's been replaced. It was originally hose with probably what's called constant tension spring clamps. They've been replaced with warm drive, like regular hose clamps. And I don't. A lot of guys don't like the spring clamps. I do. They're constant tension spring clamps. They don't loosen up like a traditional warm drive screw clamp, you know. But I like a spring clamp. I mean, they're not exactly easiest to work with, but the benefits of what they do definitely outweigh the difficulty to get them in. That's for sure. This side goes pretty easy too. There are a couple bolts that hold the manifold on, and again, we're going to crack all the lines loose on the manifold. Then we're going to get them into place on the injectors, snug them both down, and then tighten them up. That way we're get the best possible fitment that we can. This side of return lines are broken also. I'm just not even going to fool with it. I just, like I said, I ordered up a set left and right and just replace them all and be done. We're not going to be able to get too much farther here because I didn't realize it, but the memory card and the battery, or the memory card and the camera filled up and it shut off. But this day I end up getting everything back together. I end up getting the accessories, the bracketry for the alternator, the idler pulleys, tensioner pulleys, the AC compressor bracket, and the power steering pump. It's all back in, and I end up getting the air charge cooler back in, the piping for that, the upper radiator hose, the lower radiator hose I never took off, but I'm as far as I can go at the end of this day, and I'm waiting on the return lines and that V-band clamp before I can set the cab back in place. But it's been a long process for sure. And you know, if this was a Ford motor or international truck or you know a Cummins or something, this job would have went a lot faster. But you know, there's a lot of things that I'm taking apart. One that weren't right to begin with, so I have to figure out how it was supposed to go. Like there was a lot of little brackets on like fuel lines and for wiring harnesses that they were just floating in the breeze. I mean, they weren't attached to anything. And, you know, I'm not going to do that. We're going to put it back together. Let's put it back the way it's supposed to be. So it took me a lot of extra time. And I haven't figured out exactly how much time I've got in doing this, but I am going to figure it out because I'd like to know for myself. So I'm going to move on to the wiring harness. I'm going to try and figure out how it was supposed to be routed. Based on the way I took it apart and where it was laying and all the brackets that were just kind of, you know, going off to nowhere, just hanging off the wiring harness and some of the fuel lines, I know it was wrong because there's a couple spots in the harness that was there was some rubbing on the plastic that I had to repair, and the wires were okay, but it was just enough to rub. And you know the way a wiring harness should work is it should be in a place where it doesn't move and it doesn't rub on anything that does move. So I take the time and I'm trying to figure out where all this goes. And that rocker cover, that upper rocker cover, again, there's some bolts and studs in different places. So I need to get the old one, get some of the pieces out of it. And I could have just changed it over, but I guess it doesn't matter. But we're getting it in place, and we'll figure out where it goes. And all the brackets on the harness actually are bolted down now. And the the main connectors, there's two large connectors that actually go from the engine harness to the body harness. Well, they weren't bolted to anything, and there's a special bracket for it, and there's a couple of Torx bolts. The Torx bolts were in the bracket, but the connectors weren't bolted to it for some unknown reason. And the thing about wiring is, if it can move and rub, it will cause troubles. I mean, yeah, last thing you want to do is go chase down an electrical problem because of a wiring harness that rubbed just because it wasn't routed properly or secured like it should be. So we'll take the extra time and want to make sure it goes just where it needs to be and everything's just right. But you guys are probably going to miss a good bit of the rest of this. So the next part of this video series will be us setting the cab on, I believe, unless remarkably, that video shows up, but I think it's I don't think we got it, but we'll be setting the cab on and hooking up just enough to let it start. We're not going to do the complete cab install because I want to check everything. I want to, we'll have to do all the electrical connections and we'll have to do the heater hose connections. That's really what we need. And then we will start the thing up and make sure everything is what it should be before I go and bolt the cab down. Once I'm happy with the engine and I think everything's okay, then we'll move forward, get the cab bolted down, and top off all the fluids and take her for a drive and make sure everything's good to go. So these are the original return lines. You can see they're just this little piece of plastic crap. And a couple of them snapped off. You can see the difference here in the two. Maybe you can see it, I don't know. Part of it breaks off inside the injector. So I was able to get it out. And I'm replacing, there's two, one for each side of course, so I'm replacing both of them. And I found these online, which I can't tell what material it is. That could be stainless, I don't know, but obviously it's better than what we had, so now we're gonna get these put in. All right, they're all in. Let's make sure they're seated. Okay, let's go to the other side. I waited to do these because they're so far underneath here, and I wanted to make sure that I could get a light in here and make sure that they're all seated well where they're supposed to be so we don't have any leaks. And make sure them pins are in. Tell you what, that one there, let's see, I think that one needs a turn just a little. There we go. Yeah, that's all that was. Because the T, the ones that have a T in it, if they're not turned just right, they're on a bind. Because the injector kind of ramps up right here and the T hits it. So I want to be careful of that. I'm going to go recheck the other side just to be sure, but otherwise I think we're in decent shape. I don't know if I like how this is laying yet. We may be changing that. Yeah, that's better. I want it to be big sweeps. I don't want anything kinked. Let's go check the other side. Let's go quarts low. Let's say down there. Add 2 quarts. The oil filter's empty too, so there's probably at least half a quart there. But I'm gonna wait and recheck it after we get it together and we run it, and then we'll top it off. If it's 2 quarts low right now, it's not gonna hurt it. We're still okay. So, unless I've missed something, I believe we're ready to set the cab on. Oh yeah, I got one more bolt to put over there. My my band clamp, that V-band clamp right there, the exhaust showed up. I got it on, but I didn't tighten up the bracket, so I still got to do that.
Okay, let's clean some stuff up. Let's get ready for the cab. Alright, so when we go to put the cab on, I use the Gradall, and I try and get the carriage, the fork carriage, as parallel to the back of the cab as I can, and then get the boom as parallel to the frame as I can, and that makes it a little bit easier when we go to line it up and set the cab down and mounts. Like this one has 4 studs on the left side and the front, on the left side and the right side of the cab, and they're not really huge. They're like probably 12mm nuts. So I have to line them up perfectly in these holes. So I stretch the boom out and I turn the wheels left and right and really don't move much. And that, because the boom stretched out so far, it gives me some small adjustments there. But you got to start as close as you can get it to begin with, of course, because if you can't get it close, I don't know if you can tell in this or not, but I've got it sped up so fast, but I have to shove on the cab a little bit to get everything lined up. But this whole process only takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and there's a whole lot of going back and forth and looking, because that wiring harness that comes across the engine and hooks to the body is just massive. I mean, there's just so many connectors, and the routing is kind of weird, and there's a lot of things that could get pinched and get in the way, so you got to be extremely careful on this, but we get it. It goes pretty quick, really. Alright, this is the fuel filter we just put on. I need to prime it. I put diesel fuel in there. Oh man, it's in such a hard spot to get to.
Yeah, and to see.
Like everything else on this thing. Alright, now we'll see if it'll start.
Well, that's good. Start.
Yeah, there's a couple things I gotta do yet. This thing, they've got it marked, it takes 13 quarts here, so I'm 3 quarts light. So I need to put that in, and then I have to hook up the cab mounts and park and brake cable and stuff like that, but so far so good. I'm gonna go ahead and put 3 more quarts in this, like it's supposed to have. And we'll go from there. Okay, it's all finished up. We're done. I just took it down the road. It runs and drives good, shifts good, does everything it's supposed to do. Can't tell you as if there's been a truck that I've ever been this happy to be done with. No check engine lights. This thing's done. A little low on fuel. Anyways, like I said, I don't think there's one that I could say that I am this happy to be done with. Glad this thing is out of the shop. Now we can get on to something else a little more enjoyable. Alright, we're going to do something here I don't normally do. We're going to talk about what this repair costs. I had a bunch of guys in the comments curious as to what it was going to cost, how much money we're going to spend on this repair. So we're just going to go down the list. Now, some of the stuff that you're going to see in here are incidentals that, maybe your truck's in better shape and you don't have to do some of this stuff. So you could probably cut some of that out, but you can figure it out. The glow plugs themselves, that's what led to this repair. All 8 of those were $139.41. After we got it apart, we took the heads into the valves, or to the machine shop, and they pressure tested the heads, looked them all over, gave me a call, let me know what it was going to take. They replaced every single valve guide. They replaced all the exhaust seats. They replaced 2 of the intake seats, all the valve stem seals, and then milled that passenger head down 10 thousandths. So that was the total there, which is $1147.91. The next thing, most expensive, was the ARP head studs, $581.99. I got those at Summit Racing. I was able to drive right out and get them. They had them in stock. This one, I mean, that's a catch-22, I guess. If you're doing it yourself, there's a place you probably could save some money, but from what I'm understanding about these DURAMAXs with these aluminum heads, this is pretty important. I guess it really makes a difference, and that's how you hold these things together. The headset, we shouldn't even call this a headset really, because most headsets come with head gaskets. These do not. That was $284.69. This was a cheaper route than to buy the individual gaskets I needed independently. This was cheaper to go with the headset. Like I said, the machine shop missed a couple bolts that needed to be helicoiled, so I had to order a helicoil kit and take care of it myself. You know, it's something maybe you don't need to do. The fan blade, that was $82.79. That helicoil kit was $46.14. The right head gasket was a standard head gasket, $26.99. The left side, the driver's side, it was $33.79. That was at 10 thousandths oversized, over thickness. Oil filter is $8.23. I had 13 quarts of Rotella, $43.88. 4 gallons of coolant ended up being $96. I got I got a purchase on that. That was not a bad buy. The only thing that's not on here is a fuel filter. A friend of mine had a DURAMAX, and he had bought a Wix filter for it, never used it, gave it to me. I didn't include that in here, so I don't know what that would have cost. I didn't actually pay any money for that. The passenger side rocker box assembly, that was used. I ordered that and had it shipped to me. It was $101.89. I know there's guys that'll say you can get them cheaper, but I'm going to tell you what, when I looked, this was the best deal I could find with shipping. There wasn't any local around me. That was the best price I could find shipped. $9.37 for the injector hold down bolts. That was with shipping. I actually ended up buying all 8, and it was cheaper per bolt. And if you figured out the shipping the way it worked, I may have paid a little bit more for the bolts, but if I would have bought the 2 with the shipping included, it was the same shipping price. I would have got less, so it would have cost me more. Then I got those injector return lines that you saw. Those are $84.73 shipped to my door. The total for the parts was $26.87.81. Like I said, there's some of these things maybe you could take out of there. Like if you were going just to do a head gasket job, maybe, I don't know, I would never take an aluminum head off of anything and not send it in the machine. Actually, I wouldn't take a head off anything and not send it, regardless if it's cast or aluminum, either or. Maybe you wouldn't do the head studs. You know, maybe some of these things you could cut out of here. This is just how it fell for mine. Maybe yours is in better condition. So there's our total in parts. Now, I talked to several people and they said that flat rate on this pays 35 hours. So I figured my time at $50 an hour at 40 hours. I added 5 extra hours on it because of all the extra cleaning and the tapping and all that stuff I did. So that works out to about $2,000. So that total would be $46.87.81 if I was figuring it this way. And I'm showing you this for 2 things. So if you had to do this yourself, maybe you'd have an idea of what this cost would actually be. The other thing is the guys that said that there's no way in the world I could do this repair and still make a profit on this truck. And I did. I'm not going to go into particulars of what I bought it for, what I sold it for, but I'm going to tell you this. I took the bed off of it and sold it for $2,000. So you take $2,000 off this. This repair has cost me basically $26.87, and I was able to sell that truck and make my normal percentage after doing all this work. So many guys out there that were giving me grief about this, you know, the proof's in the pudding. You know, there's a thing called creating value, and that's what this truck had to turn into. I paid more for this truck than I wanted to, and a lot of times that can be a bad thing and turn out badly. In this case, I was able to sell that dump bed off. It ate up credited me $2,000 worth of parts off of this. So basically, you figure my labor was paid for by the dump bed, and I put 2687.81 into it, and that's figuring the total hours that I've spent on this repair. So it worked out well, and I made my normal profit margin I like to make. Wonder what that might be for.